Kia ora tātou. I'm Siang, the marketing manager at Hell Pizza, and so excited to welcome you back to our Great New Zealand book trip. For us, it was a real treat to get to explore Aotearoa with you last year through the stories and experiences of the wonderful award-winning illustrators and authors that took us on their journeys. Fun fact, did you know last year more than 23,000 of you tuned into our live readings? And we think that's pretty cool. So ka pai to all the schools, teachers, parents, and of course you, the students, who came along for the journey. For those of you new to us today, the Great New Zealand Book Trip is a special addition to the Hell Reading Challenge, which, by the way, I hope you've already made a start on your reading wheels for this year, and hopefully the illustrators and authors you meet on this year's trip will help inspire you to finish those pizza wheels super quick so that you can get stuck into those pizzas at the end. Now, this year we've also got a brand new map of Aotearoa that you can use to track your reading trips around our beautiful country. Lots of you have already been to one of the live readings with us, so you can mark off those places on your maps too. Now, you can see here that it shows some of the landmarks of Aotearoa and the towns and cities where our road trip authors live, like Gavin Bishop and Tanya Roxburgh here in Christchurch. And some of you would also remember that our final stop of last year's trip was when we visited Joy Cowley in Featherston, which is right there, real close to Wellington. So if you're keen to track your own trip, you can download and print your own map from the Hell Reading Challenge website. We'll also post a link on our Facebook page, so it's nice and easy for you to find. Now, today is super exciting for us because it's the first stop on the trip for 2023, and we have the wonderfully talented Sonya Wilson, who will be taking us on a trip to Fiordlands, where today's story, Spark Hunter, is set. Now, Sonya is a person of many, many talents. She's not only an award-winning author, but also a journalist, a television reporter, presenter, and producer. Now, last year, Spark Hunter, which was Sonya's first novel, by the way, won the NZSA Best First Book Award at the 2022 New Zealand Book Awards for Children's and Young Adults. It's an epic Kiwi adventure fantasy story of survival in one of the world's last great wildernesses. So it's now time to pass you over to Sonya, and I'll be back in a little bit for some Q&As and, of course, announce the two winners of today's book, Spark Hunter. So sit back and enjoy, and over to you, Sonya.
Thank you, Siang. Morena koutou. It's lovely to be here. I'm speaking to you from Auckland, where it's very stormy outside, which is kind of appropriate for the passage that I'm going to read to you from Spark Hunter. I'm going to start reading from, it's about a third of the way through the book, so I'll just give you a vague idea of what's happened so far for those of you that haven't read it. Basically, like Siang said, this is a story set down in Fiordland, and it's about a girl called Nissa Marshall. She is 12, and she spends a bit of time in Fiordland National Park with her family, and she sees these lights in the forest. You can see the lights on the cover of the book there. So she sees these mysterious lights, and she's determined to find out what they are. When she's on school camp in Deep Cove, she sees some of these lights in the forest and she runs off after them. And of course, if you run off into the bush on your own with no map and no trail, you get lost pretty quickly. So she gets really badly lost, and a big storm hits and she gets into a lot of trouble. She sort of gets inside of a tree, of a hollowed out tree trunk, to shelter from the storm. She's hypothermic. She sort of is really desperate, and she sort of falls asleep. And I'm going to pick up the story here where she wakes up the next morning, still completely lost in the forests of Fiordland after chasing these lights. Okay, so this is chapter 9. Nissa was awake, but her eyes were still closed, stuck together with grit. Her head hurt, her throat hurt, her back was sore and stiff. She thought that her hands and feet probably hurt too, but they were so numb, she wasn't even sure they were still attached. All she could smell was wet wood, and all she could taste was dirt. There was warmth on her face now, though. Daylight, sunlight. She must have climbed out of the tree. She was lying on the ground outside. Wait, there's a noise. Something was crackling and rustling through the leaf matter, stepping towards her. Something small. It wasn't a bird. Birds hopped. The hairs on Nissa's arms stood up. A few silent seconds passed, and then someone spoke in a language unlike anything Nissa had ever heard before. There were no words, just a rush of sounds, like the voice of a river, or of the wind, or of the trees, like a breeze bustling through leaves. Nissa wrenched her eyes open. Everything was so blurry and so bright. "It looks horrible," a voice said in English now. "It is a she," the other voice replied. "Hello, lass?" The voices sounded weird, small and sharp and brassy, but all Nissa could see was two painfully bright lights. They were so close to her face that she had to squint. Wait, what? Lights? She scrambled up into a sitting position, blinking madly, trying to clear the dirt and grit away from her eyes. The lights moved back, away from her face, and Nissa saw that they weren't just lights. There was something else to them, a shape to them. The shape of a body. Oh my God. Each light was being emitted from the center of a small creature with long arms and legs. Nissa rubbed her eyes, trying to regain her proper focus, because what she was seeing made no sense whatsoever. There were two creatures standing in front of her, both about the length of her school ruler, both with glowing lights where their stomachs should have been. They were human-shaped, but most definitely not human. Nissa's heart thumped so hard it nearly burst through her chest. She scrambled backwards on her bum and hands until her back hit a tree. Oh my God, this couldn't be happening. The things that she was looking at, they couldn't really be there. But the things that couldn't be there stayed there, smiling at her. "Hello," one of them said, then "hello" again, as if she was deaf. All Nissa could do was stare. The creatures stared back at her. One was a birdy sort of army green colour. The other was several shades of brown, a cinnamon torso with darker grey-brown arms and legs. "I'm seeing things," Nissa eventually managed to croak. "Aye, you are," the brown creature said. "You are seeing me. I am Agnes Westwind. I am with you." Her eyes were wide pools of ink. She stared at Nissa for a moment, then blinked quickly 3 times before pushing her hair, a messy collection of feathery, not quite curls, away from her face and flinging a long, skinny arm across her chest to point to her companion. "He is Ahi." "I am with you," Ahi said with a bow. His eyes were big too and dark, but ringed with yellow. Agnes Westwind grinned, turned around and rolled her shoulders back. A pair of wings opened from the middle of her back, 4 delicately veined stained glass windows that reflected the greens of the forest and crinkled like cellophane as they unfolded. Nissa's mouth fell open. Wings! They had wings! Agnes Westwind winked. "I thought you might fancy that," she said. "You are fairies," Nissa stammered. Her tongue felt fat and heavy in her mouth. Ahi, the army green one, laughed. "Ha, I am kin with the Kia, in actual fact, if you wish to particularize." He gave a little flourish of his arm. "That is to say, the most handsome, witty, and intelligent of the native parrot species." "And I am kin with the Piwakawaka," Agnes added, as if it all made perfect sense. "Or the fantail, depending on what flavour human speak you prefer." "Oh," Nissa said. Right. Agnes wore some sort of breastplate over her chest, tiny interlocking lines of cream shells like scales over what looked like pieces of stripped off totara bark. Bands of plaited flax were tied around her arms. Her stomach glowed and pulsed with light. What do your kin name you? Ahi asked Nissa. He seemed to think that she looked a bit funny. His eyes sparkled when he looked at her. My name is Nissa Marshall. She rubbed her forehead with shaking fingers. Was she actually awake? Surely this was a dream. She felt so strange, as though her body was being pressed, tightening from the inside out. She felt the same kind of pressure building in her head that she got when she dived down too deep in the swimming pool, like her ears needed popping, like she needed to equalize. The Agnes fantail creature climbed up onto a nearby log and scrambled along the length of it on her hands and feet to where Nissa sat with her back against the tree. She came right up to Nissa's face so that their noses nearly touched and placed a small hand on Nissa's cheek. Her hand felt rough, like the skin of someone who lived their life outdoors, a hand that had touched rocks and rivers and bark. Agnes leaned right in close, frowned, and tilted her head. Are you quite well? You seem to be showing symptoms of something being wrong. I think I might be losing my mind, Nissa said. You would not be the first, he said, leaping up next to Agnes. I told you, Agnes, this pedestrian doesn't know who's which from when's what. She needs forgetting. What did you expect? Agnes replied, sleeping under only the sky's blue blanket with nothing to keep her body and spirits dry. She had the anchor tree, and yet look at the size of her. This human is impenetrable. She has only just emerged. Give it time. She shall be right and well soon enough. Anchor tree, Nissa said. I don't understand. Agnes Westwind smiled. I think you'd better come with us, Nissa Marshall. You do appear rather fishy about the gills. Okay, Nissa replied, because she didn't know what else to say. Splendid, Agnes said. Her wings whirred and bustled as she rose up into the air. Come, she smiled. The others are going to be very pleased. But as Nissa scrambled onto her knees and lurched up to standing, she saw Ahi shoot Agnes a look that suggested that the others, whoever they were, might not actually be that pleased at all. Nissa stumbled through the forest in a daze, not entirely convinced that all that was happening was actually happening to her. She blinked, screwed her eyes closed and opened them again, shook her head, pinched herself. Whatever she did, when she looked up again, the forest fairy creatures were still there, right in front of her, as real and as solid as the trunks of the trees she was passing. The forest they were travelling through was so thick with supplejack and kia that Nissa had to resort to crawling on her hands and knees at times to get through it. But Ahi and Agnes Westwind moved through the trees above her effortlessly, sometimes flying, sometimes not. They bounced off mosses, hopped between ferns, flitted from limb to limb, knocking raindrops from branches and shaking the last of the storm from the trees. They even stopped halfway up trunks to peel back pieces of bark, using it to catch the drips and drink. The scar left on the tree looked like something Nissa had seen before, but she couldn't think for the life of her what it was. When Agnes and Ahi finally stopped, coming to rest on the exposed roots of a giant rimu, Nissa had no idea how far they'd travelled. They could have come 1 kilometre or 20, should have believed either. We are here, Agnes said. This is our telling tree. She tells us we are home. Agnes patted the rimu's reddish tinged bark like it was a kitten. She, Nissa asked, trees are female. Not all of them, Agnes replied brusquely. Some are male, some are both, some are neither. Come. Nissa turned around, looking up and down, trying to locate the place she was supposed to come to. The bush seemed brighter here somehow, more green. But other than that, there was no discernible difference from the rest of the forest she'd just crawled through. There was nothing that looked like a home, though there was more noise. Above her, fantails cheated, tui yabbered, and bellbirds ran through their scales. Come, Agnes repeated. She flew through a curtain of lichen hanging from the branches of a beech tree. Come, Nissa Marshall girl, Agnes called again before the glow of her stomach light disappeared completely into a tangle of supplejack so thick there was no telling what lay beyond it. Ahi followed Agnes through the wall of knitted vines. Keep on, lass, he shouted. Nissa took a few tentative steps towards the tangled wood. It looked impenetrable for someone her size, but the vines gave way easily enough when she parted them with her hands. She pulled at them, making a tunnel for herself, crawling and hauling her body through the knot of wood. When she was finally able to extract herself from the supplejack web and stand upright on the other side of it, Nissa found herself on the threshold of a massive central clearing. It was surrounded by towering ancient trees, tōtara, kāmahi, rimu, miro, and beech, their branches covered in tendrils of ghost grey lichen, their trunks wrapped in the brightest green moss. Rata trees blushed red in the sunlight. Closer to the ground, lemonwood and horapito grew above continuous circles of ferns. There was bracken and flax and manuka, flowers too. White Kalmisia daisies were scattered around the clearing. Massive mountain buttercups and olearia blossoms poked their heads out from between jagged toothed leaves. Moss and lichen was everywhere. Thick mounds of it covered tree stumps and rocks, thinner layers draped over a fallen tree trunk like a blanket over an old man's knee. Nissa's mouth fell open. She knew that this shouldn't have been possible, that all these different types of plants couldn't and didn't all grow together in the same patch of forest. But here they were, nature's full force, every one of Fiordland's vast forest species, from alpine to sea level, right here in front of her. A huge open-mouthed smile plastered itself across Nissa's face. I'm here, she thought. I'm actually here. And unlike what her 5-year-old self might have expected, this place of the forest fairies wasn't made of glitter and sparkles and pixie dust. It was something more than that, more real life and yet more magical too. Haere mai, Ahi said. Other creatures began to clamber out of the intricately woven tree huts hanging high above them, and from the ground level burrows, and from holes in rotting logs that had tiny white mushrooms growing up their sides. Dozens of these little forest fairies emerged, all with those bright, starlit stomachs. Flashes and flickerings of light caught Nissa's eyes from all directions. One had skin the colour of an overcast sky and stared at her with eyes the kind of blue that Nissa had only seen before in the glacial lakes of Mackenzie country. Another was a deeper, inky blue, like the colour of the water in the fjords. Another was the colour of kiwi feathers, another grey and textured like alpine scree. They came closer, flitting around behind Nissa's back to find a backpack where perhaps they thought a pair of wings should have been. They tugged at her rain-soaked jacket and pulled expectantly at the lace of her boot as if it was a worm that might wriggle in response. There was a swell of chattering voices and a clattering of wings. Is it chasing birds? Someone shouted. Is it seeking green? Another demanded to know. Agnes has been and gone and done it, another yelled. They sounded almost angry. Nissa smiled to show them that she was friendly, that she meant no harm, but she did feel like a bumbling giant amongst all this delicate wonder. Welcome to Forest Common, Agnes said. I apologise. As you will have observed, some of our collective do not have much experience with your particular kin. But you all speak English, Nissa said. Yes, Agnes said proudly, and Māori, and several other forest tongues, but it is only polite to speak the language of a visitor when that visitor is present. It is rather fat, someone yelled. They are all fat like that, poraki, another shouted back. Please forgive the impertinence, Agnes said, smiling. Nissa grinned at them all and gave an awkward sort of bow, which she immediately regretted. What was that? She scolded herself, but she had no idea what she was supposed to be doing or saying. She didn't know the protocol for visiting secret fairy dells. Thank you for having me, she said eventually, and that seemed to have been the right thing to do, because in response, several of the creatures touched their long fingers to their foreheads, then opened the palms of their hands out towards her. You are welcome, the gesture said. Should she make a speech now, she wondered, like, I'm pleased to be here, I mean you no harm, etc., like she'd seen the characters in alien movies do when they landed on a new planet. Nissa took a breath, readied herself to begin, but an angry voice cut through the crowd, stalling the speech in her mouth. Agnes Westwind. The onlookers fell silent. A very serious-looking creature emerged from the crowd. He was beautiful, despite the hard look in his eyes, a creature of soft mossy green fading to a feathery yellow near his stomach light. Agnes Westwind, the creature said, what have you done? I've brought us a human, Agnes replied. The angry newcomer turned to Nissa, looked her up and down and said simply, no. The hairs on Nissa's arms stood up again. The time for no is past, Kaha, Agnes said. I have brought her here now. The lass would have died out there alone. And what of it? She has barely seen a dozen summers. Exactly, Kaha replied, folding his arms across his chest and glaring at Nissa. Nissa felt herself starting to panic. She had no idea what to do or say. She looked from Agnes, the fantail fairy, to Ahi, the Kia creature. Neither of them met her eye. She started to shiver. I'm not welcome here. I should just go now, try and head back to where? For some reason, all the stress and shock probably, Nissa couldn't, right at that moment, recall where she had come from. Can somebody please help me find this poor Nissa Marshall girl a drink? Agnes called out, bustling Kaha out of Nissa's line of sight. She is in need of some strong waters, and we must get her out of this weather. Nissa hadn't even noticed that the rain had started again, but her jacket was shiny with water. Rain dripped from her forehead onto pale, goose-bumped skin. There was blood running from the cuts on her legs, mixing with rain to form two red rivers down her shins. She's got the collywobbles, someone shouted. Nissa could feel what was coming next, but there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her legs started to shake, her stomach lurched, her shoulders fell forward, and she fainted, dropping to the ground right where she stood. Do you suppose it eats leaves? She heard a voice from the crowd ask before everything went black. That's it.
Oh, amazing. Thank you. Thanks very much, Sonya. You've got such a wonderful way you use your words. Not only do you make it easy for us to paint that picture of the Nissa and her environment, the way you use your words, there's a link between the picture that you paint and also the different sensation Nissa's feeling. So yeah, thanks very much for sharing that with us. Yeah, so now we'll move on to some questions, because we've got some really great questions that have come in from everyone at schools. So let's kick it off with some questions about Spark Hunter. Southland Girls High School, they wanted to know, how did you come up with this unique storyline?
Sure. Well, the story sort of began when I was growing up in Southland, and I used to spend time in Fiordland with my family, and I would sit in the forest there. And for those of you who haven't been to Fiordland, it is absolutely beautiful. The forest is just so stunning there. And when I was a kid, I used to sit there thinking, this place is so beautiful that surely there must be some magic involved here. Surely there must be some sort of creatures or otherworldly sort of presence in this forest. And I used to sort of see all these twinklings of light in the forest, which was something to do maybe with the sunlight hitting the dew on the leaves, or maybe it was something else. And then when I became an adult and I was thinking of a story to write, I just wondered, well, what if there is some other sort of creature living in Fiordland? Who would they be, and how would they be, and why would they be there? And that's really when the story started.
Oh, cool. It's awesome. Yeah, so often we hear about how stories begin from like personal experiences, and this is another great example of it. I like to think there's something probably magical about the place. It's we're so lucky to have an environment like that right here on our backyard. So, yeah. Now, from the same school, we had a question about a teacher, Hannah Kramer, said that their students were heading to Deep Cove next term, and they were really excited to read your text. So, and she wanted to know what challenges that you faced when you were writing the story, and how did you overcome it?
Oh, I'm so excited for you guys that you're going to Deep Cove. That's so cool. So, yeah, again, for those of you that don't know, so NZSA in Spark Hunter, NZSA goes to camp at Deep Cove, which is in Doubtful Sound in Fiordland. It's a really long way away. It's right over on the western side of the mountain, so it's really remote and it's absolutely beautiful. And it's where I went for my school camp when I was at Rosedale Intermediate in Invercargill many years ago. So I'm very excited for you guys that you get to go, because it's an amazing experience. You all need to promise me that you will not run off into the bush chasing any creatures or lights. Okay, do not do that. That only happens in books. If you see any lights in the trees, talk to your teacher, tell your teacher to email me, but do not go chasing after them. Right, so sorry, back to the question. What challenges did I face? So the challenge really was in I hadn't written a book before, and I didn't know how to write a novel. So Spark Hunter took me a really long time to write, because I was learning how to write as I wrote it. I was a broadcast journalist for many years, so I spent more than 20 years telling other people's stories, telling true stories. And the way that I told those stories was that I wrote them for television. So I always had a cameraman with me filming pictures. So all the pictures were there, and I just had to sort of impart the information. So I had to learn how to write prose, how to write long form fiction, which means that you're having to describe things on the page so that the reader can understand them. And when it's such a big work, several thousand words long, you really have to kind of learn all these aspects of writing, which I didn't properly understand when I started. So, how to sort of write characters properly and plot and all of that sort of thing. So I learned as I went. But it took me a really long time, but I relied a lot. I did loads and loads of reading about how to write, but also just loads of reading of other people's stories, and loads of reading about Fiordland. I've got a massive bookshelf behind me, as you can see, and I've got loads of books on Fiordland, and there's so many wonderful stories that come from that place that are true, that are more fantastic than anything I could have made up. So I was able to use all of those stories to make my fiction feel more true. And one of the challenges actually was knowing what to leave out. So you can't just kind of spew out all the information that you learn onto your page. You've got to kind of weave it into the story in a way that's interesting and relevant. And that was one of the main challenges, really, is just knowing what to leave out rather than knowing what to put in. Yeah.
Oh, cool. Yeah, it must have been such a difficult process in making that transition from that journalistic sort of writing and going into this world. And I mean, you've done amazing. We had a few schools ask this question, and it's quite often a real insightful question for students to learn about. But Papatoe, Ashburton, Sawyers-Bay School, and a few others wanted to know what inspired you to write. And was there a person? Was it a person, or was it a situation, or what? Yeah. what inspired you?
Yeah, I've always loved telling stories, and in many different ways. And like I said before, I was a journalist for a really long time, so I was telling other stories, other people's stories. And I just got to the point where I decided I wanted to try making up one of my own, to create my own world. And I love reading. I love reading stories about places that I wasn't so familiar with. And I wanted to have a go at inventing my own world, basically. So that's kind of why I decided to write. And I've been inspired by all the wonderful authors I've read over the years, right from when I was a child reading books up until I was an adult. And I just kind of love what language can do and what stories can do. Stories are so important to humans. They teach us so much. Even made up stories, particularly made up stories, you know, the lies we tell in fiction really help us understand the truths of the world. So I was really inspired to have a go at that, really, because I wanted to be part of that. And I was inspired, really, I have to say, by Fiordland in particular, because I love that place so much. And I'm so aware of how precious that place is. It really is one of the last great wildernesses in the country. And instead of sort of you know, trying to write something that just shouts to people, we need to protect this place, it's amazing. I think a really nice way of showing showing Fiordland's wonder and its preciousness is to write a fictional story like this, to write a novel that really helps immerse young people into that world and to show them how precious that place is rather than tell them. So yeah, that's what inspired me to write it. And I've been really lucky to have lots of inspiring teachers along the way as well that helped me really appreciate storytelling in all its forms. So when I was a student in Invercargill, I had a great speech and drama teacher who taught me wonderful things about plays and poetry and really great writing that inspired me. I had some great English teachers when I was at high school. And then I had a really great time at the University of Auckland, here in Auckland, when I went back to learn how to be a creative writer and went back to school there. So lots of great inspirational writers in our own country, as well as the ones that I read who come from overseas. Yeah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, you're right. It's so important to to not only tell stories that are truth and real, but you know, holding on to that creative side of everyone. You know, like of fantasies, everything. You know, you can tell so many. There's so many ways to deliver a message, a really important message, to highlight certain beauties like the Fiordlands. And if you can do it through a creative, fictional way, all the better, I feel. Yeah. Now, on that, there's also another sometimes difficult question, but for some authors and not for others. But Will Broker from Ashburton Intermediate wanted to know who your favorite author was when you were young.
You're right. That is a really hard question. I'm not very good at remembering all the books that I read. I don't know if you guys are the same, but I read them all and I love them, and then I sort of forget them years on. But I am prepared for this one because people always ask. So when I was young, I loved Roald Dahl when I was at primary school, right? This is my copy of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory from when I was 8.
Amazing.
Very, very tattered. I loved Roald Dahl. And I loved Margaret Mahy. So when I was a kid, the picture books of Margaret Mahy I loved, and then she writes for older children as well, so I read those. When I got a bit older, so sort of high school, I loved Whittier Himaira. Read all of his books. I loved them. I also loved the poetry of Hone Tūwhare and the stories he told and the language he used then. To give you guys some sort of news you can use, I'm going to show you some recent books that you might want to all look up. So these are the best books I've read lately for kids. We've got The Tomo by Marianne Scott. That's a New Zealand book. That's really cool. I read that all through the night because it was so exciting I couldn't put it down. Lizard's Tale, that's by Weng Wai Chan. She's an Auckland writer, but it's set in Singapore. That's really cool. The Memory Thief, this is a cool one. This one a big award at the Book Awards last year as well. That's set down in Dunedin. That's a great book by Leonie Agnew. The other books I absolutely love, or the other writers I love that you kids might know about, is Philip Pullman, who wrote the Northern Lights trilogy, which has been turned into movies and stuff. I love the Hunger Games. You guys have probably seen the movies, but go and read the books. The books are really great, brilliantly written. My other favorite is a guy called Neil Gaiman. Neil writes, he wrote Coraline, and he writes these really cool kids books. I'll show you these ones that are beautiful. So this is a retelling of Sleeping Beauty, where it's a woman who comes and saves Sleeping Beauty rather than a prince. This one, Odd and the Frost Giants, sort of Norwegian fairy tale. So Neil Gaiman writes these amazing fairy tales that are really cool. And this one is one of my favorite books lately. It's called The Graveyard Book. And that's for kind of, maybe sort of early high school readers, I guess. It's really cool as well. So they're some of my favorites.
Oh, awesome. Thanks for sharing those. We probably have one more time for one more question. And this is a really good question from Papatoito Intermediate. What is the one piece of advice you would give to someone wanting to write a book?
Okay, can I give you 2 pieces of advice?
You can give as many as you think.
Yeah, I've got 2 pieces of advice. They're really simple. My 2 pieces of advice are read and go outside. Okay, if you want to be a writer, you need to read and you need to go outside. Reading, as I've kind of mentioned before, reading is so important, and not just if you want to be a writer, but reading is really important if you want to be successful in any aspect of your life, because reading fiction, reading made up stories, it gives you the chance to be inside someone's head. So it gives you insight into other characters, other worlds. It means that you build empathy. So you get an understanding of what it's like to be someone in someone else's shoes. It builds vocabulary. It makes you super smart. There's loads of studies around that shows that the more you read as a kid, the more likely you'll be successful later in life. So not only will reading make you a great writer, it'll just make you a great human as well, which is worth doing. My other piece of advice was go outside. Now for Spark Hunter, obviously going outside was really important because it's all set in the forest. So for me, just being in the forest was really stimulating, and I got loads of ideas. I spent loads of time just watching birds and watching trees and working out a bunch of stuff. But for anyone, take your imagination for a walk, right? That is a really good thing to be able to do. Go outside in the fresh air. You're sort of the place that fires up your imagination. For me, it's the forest. For you, it might be walking up a hill or walking to your local park, or just being outside in your backyard where you can just sit and let yourself get a bit bored, because your mind then starts to wander and your imagination starts to fire. So go outside, go walking, let yourself notice the world, because writers are people who write, writers are people who read, and writers are people who notice things. So you notice things about the world. Take the time to kind of look at things and notice things about the world around you, notice things about people, and be curious. And you can't get curious just sitting inside with a device all day. You need to go outside and let your mind wander. So yeah, read, go outside. Not only will you be a better writer, but you'll be a better human. Books make you smart, nature makes you happy. Yeah.
Amazing. Those are brilliant, absolutely brilliant words of advice. And I think the start of your reading actually highlighted the going outside bit. I think the way you described as Nisa woke up and how the sun hit her skin and her face, and she felt the warmth. You know, those are all those things, right, that you kind of know you won't notice unless you're outside, getting bored, like you said.
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Never underestimate the power of being outside, or the power of being bored. It's good for you. Yeah.
Yeah. And I hope all you kids, like I did it when I was a kid. I'm sure a lot of other your teachers did it when they were kids. Go outside, lie down, look at the clouds, see what kind of characters form in the clouds. You know, those kind of things.
Yes, exactly. Yeah.
Cool. Look, thank you very much, Sonia. But before we go, I wanted to announce the two winners of today's book, Spark Hunter. The first winner was Devashel School. I hope I've said that right. And the second is Manukau Library. So thank you very much. Sonia, thanks again so much for coming in. To all the students, all the classrooms and all the teachers, thanks for bringing your tamariki to the on this journey. It's been great to have you, and we hope to see you next time.
Thanks so much for having me. I really enjoyed it, and thanks to all you classes and schools and kids that came along. I really appreciate you guys showing an interest in Spark Hunter. It's awesome.
Cool. Thanks everyone. Ka kite.
Ka kite.